Edge of Chaos, starring Neurotoxin and Joe Ryan. Edge of Chaos is a free-flowing discussion, occasionally dealing with mature topics. Alright everybody, welcome back to the Edge of Chaos. I am, of course, Joe Ryan, here again with Neurotoxin.
Hello.
And I want to apologize straight off for our long absence. Many factors were at work there, but let's just say that stuff was going on. But hey, we're back in the saddle and ready to go. And I guess the biggest topic right now seems relevant. VA crisis. The VA, I guess, scandal, maybe you could call it. I don't know. It's being referred to a bunch of different ways. And we've both...
VA clusterfuck is the one I prefer.
Right. Yeah, that's another good one. And it actually, you know, it's not... We've talked about this, you know, and I remember earlier in the year, I believe we talked about this, just in light of the suicide rates and things like that. But, you know, I think this caught a lot of people by surprise, maybe least of all the vets that have to deal with the system all the time.
Yeah, really.
How bad this is and how deep this is, how entrenched the problems are. I mean, it's mind-boggling to some extent, I think.
Well, here's the thing. To me, honestly, it's not mind-boggling because, even though I'm not a veteran myself, I have dealt with the system in that, as a social worker, having dealt with a lot of veterans in different situations, whether they're homeless, disabled, some sort of need of case management, need of treatment. And I've had to deal with the VA and kind of represent them, advocate for it on their behalf with the VA. And I know what a clusterfuck it is. And I have never met a VA agent, someone that works for the VA, in my personal experience, that was not caring, or that was a bad person, or that was not wanting to deliver a quality service. Now, yeah, some of these guys, and a lot of them were ex-military themselves, and some of these guys still have that gung-ho, like, yeah, we're military, we can handle anything mentality, which makes them not always the most compassionate for veterans who don't have that mentality,
right,
who have ended up on the streets and on drugs and a lot of health problems, PTSD, whatever. But they still deliver a decent service. That doesn't mean a bad service. That's just kind of their mentality. So it's difficult to blame anyone in particular. But to go back to, it's really not surprising to me because it's just such a bureaucratic embarrassment. And honestly, to me, I've always watched this, and I've always been kind of confused by this, because this is probably the one issue where you're going to have zero partisan divide.
Right, or you shouldn't, right. And if anything, it seems like, there is no divide. Both parties shit on this system and just say they're going to do something about it and do nothing. Right, so and toss money at it, maybe, or nothing.
Well, that's what they're going to do, maybe a little different. But, you know, I want to meet the politician, Republican or Democrat, even independent, that says, you know what, we don't need quality services for veterans, we don't need to fix the VA, fuck that. I want to meet that politician, because that's it. That's going to be your last day as a politician, the day you say something like that.
Basically.
There is absolutely no way any politician in their right mind, I mean, I don't think very many people think that, but even a politician that may potentially think that would never say that. Both parties are completely in agreement. This system has got to be fixed. It's despicable how we treat our veterans. And yet, year after year, time after time, the same reports, the same clusterfuck, the same delays, the same shitty service, the same confusion, the same problems. Honestly, this is one that's always kind of been an enigma to me. My theory is the bureaucrats at the top of this system, very top, maybe not necessarily like the secretary, because the secretaries are appointed and they change president to president.
Yeah.
But the ones right under them are so entrenched.
And they've been there a while, right? That's coming up.
Like, in my opinion, if I were president, Mr. President, we're talking to you here. Or if
Barry, over here. Over here.
Or if I were secretary of the VA, my solution, even though maybe this is a little, this is a little blunt, but I think at this point, it's just everyone that's been there, all the department directors, everyone that's not appointed, everyone that's hired, they just all got to go. That's it. You guys are retired.
Right.
Get out. Because this is something you learn in management school, in organizing school, bureaucracies. Is a bureaucrat that's been there long enough, they're just going to be intransigent.
They don't give a shit anymore, yeah.
It's not even, again, I have a hard time blaming people individually. Sometimes I do, but not in this case. I don't know, so I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. It's just they want to keep their job, for one, and they're used to things working a certain way. And once you start changing things, these people will become obsolete.
That's true.
And they don't want that.
They don't want cheese, I guess. But I do feel the need to quantify what we're talking about, maybe for people who don't know and haven't read about this.
Oh, please do.
So I guess the crux of this is that, and I think this was something that you and I had to look up and confirm that we had. What we're talking about here is people already in the system, and that's its own scandal, is how long it takes for you to go from being a guy who just got out of the military. And for those who don't know, like, basically VA is for people who aren't in the military as a whole career and retire that way. You're in the military 6 years, you get out, you did a couple tours in Iraq, and you were discharged honorably. That's people that the VA serves. So when because DoD, healthcare for active duty and retired, is a whole separate system and has no connection, interaction with the VA system. A lot of people don't know that. So these are people that served. A lot of them are battle wounded, injured, missing limbs, having mental issues. So we're talking about people that need care. When they say they're chronically ill or have an acute condition, they mean it. And a lot of times it's the difference between them living a productive life and being in a shell shooting up heroin. As we were seeing, there was an episode of Vice just last night about that. These people,
or under a bridge,
or both, and they're dying in droves. And it's a national shame. But what was going on? And this started in Phoenix. It spread to, I think it was 26 other facilities now. For anytime someone comes in and says, "I have a problem, I need to see someone," and an example would be, "I think I have cancer, I need to get scanned and see a doctor for that." They put you in the system, and you're supposed to see a doctor within X amount of time, and I think it's like 14 to something days. It's within a couple of weeks, basically. What they were doing, because they had to be a supervisor or an administrator of one of these places, your staff had to be meeting their numbers. So instead of putting them on the list when they knew full well there's no way in hell with the staffing we have that they're going to be able to be seen in that amount of time. So they would just keep these off-the-record lists of these people and go, "Well, you're on the hidden list long enough for us to actually put you on the real list so that we can look like..."
Or for you to die.
Right. And then you're not a problem anyway. But
then we have one less to take care of.
Is it on paper? No, we're making our numbers, and this kind of sounds similar to what you were saying about how, oh no, there's all these things that were produced here. Yeah, here they are. Well, where are they? Well, I don't know. I wrote down that they were here, right? On this whole Soviet system. It's kind of the inverse of that. We're hitting our numbers. That's all anyone cares about. So in that system, the actual getting human beings to doctors is kind of irrelevant. It's rendered irrelevant. So that's the problem. And basically, it seems like more and more that this is coming out as an issue it plagues the entire system. I don't know. It's starting to seem.
So you mean to say the bureaucracy reported numbers that weren't reflective of reality, and the politicians swallowed this up? No, such a thing could never possibly occur.
And there was I guess it's under the associate, not the chairman of the Committee on Veterans Affairs, but the vice chairman. I think Congressman from Florida. I forget what his name is, but
no, that's the chairman. He's the Republican. He's Jeff Miller.
He said this is the tip of the iceberg, and I guess we're about to.
Oh, I believe it.
This is going
to get worse. This is going to get a lot worse. So here's the thing. Here's some other things I've heard about the VA. This is me personally hearing. I haven't verified it necessarily to be a concrete fact, but I believe the people I've heard it from. One huge problem with the VA is they're technologically about in the 1970s, maybe 1979-ish.
Oh, that whole medical records online thing, electronic document management that the rest of planet fucking Earth is using already?
They haven't figured that out. They don't
use it. You remember the news shots of the warehouses full of files and folders and just stacked to the ceiling? That's how they do it. That's why it takes to get the system.
That right there. Let's just stop right there. To me, it's mind-boggling. What idiot in their right mind really thinks that's a good idea? I mean, who? Yeah. I want to meet the person that says, "No, we don't need to put our records online." Who says that?
And then we start two
wars. Let's bring him on the show. I want to interview that person.
I would love to. Yeah.
What the fuck is wrong with you?
So we're processing things like we did in the Vietnam era while we're overshooting at Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. Really? These guys are coming back more, and you have a record. Now, before, people would just die. Now we've got people coming back and they're alive, but they're missing 3 limbs and they need constant care.
We'll talk about the increased demand in a little bit. That's a completely different subject. I want to kind of talk about how the VA does things. The other issue, this is one you hear a little bit less about, is the way they communicate. There is no electronic communication. If you want to communicate with the VA, you've got exactly two options. You can go to the VA office and get a number, and it makes the DMV look like a really efficient process.
Yeah.
Or they treat you like shit, too. Like, they treat you like you're some sort of beggar. It's like, hello, this is not some welfare mother with 5 children that's never worked in her life. You can at least argue over whether or not that person deserves polite service. This is a fucking veteran. This is someone that went and fought in a war for this country.
I got shot at, or shot, and yeah, right.
And you get some bureaucrat being rude to him and telling him to take it over. It's like, who thinks this is okay? Show me the person that thinks this is acceptable. And then, or you can write to them using the post office. And, it's great when you're having to deal with a bureaucracy and all you have is a piece of paper and you write it down and you get one thing wrong and they say, we've all been there.
I guess they could, when they're showing the news footage of the stacks of paper, they can go, oh, that little slip of paper laying on top of that file cabinet over there, that's mine. They're going to get to that any day now. There it is. I see my letter right there. Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is just, it's
odd.
Why? Why are we still using paper records and paper communication? I really don't understand. I don't understand why any politician, any president, any chair of the VA committee in either house of the Congress, any VA secretary, why anyone wouldn't say, you know what, I'm going to be the guy that brings the VA in the 21st century and as far as our communication. I mean, I don't know. I haven't done the research on why that hasn't been done. But this is why I say all those bureaucrats up at top of it, they got to go. Because the only viable explanation for this is they're barricading it. They're barricading it, and they've gotten so powerful, they have the connections, that if you fuck with them and you try to change it, they will eat you. They will get you deposed from office. They will get you removed from that appointment, that committee appointment in the House, whatever it is. They will make your life a living hell. So they make sure no one can touch them, and they leave the system as is. Now, I can see where if you have bureaucrats that have been there for, no, I'm kind of ranting, but if they've been there for a long time, for whatever reason, they may have a problem with this giant overhaul because they'd have to change the whole system. It may jeopardize their jobs or the way they do things or whatever.
Especially if your job title is VA paper sorter.
But right, I mean, I think it goes further up the food chain. But I agree with you. I don't know all the exact details, but I do know that when you're to that point and you're talking about people dying and these are veterans, then the only viable solution is like, all right, you know what? Here's the axe. Who wants the axe? Oh, you're resigning. Yeah, you decided to retire. Excellent.
So that, I guess you gave me the only plausible defense I could have for a weasel like Shinseki, who still has his job, still is in charge of the VA, and apparently has Obama's confidence, even though he gave his classic Obama non-answer to the whole thing, and basically offered the really limp-wristed support for him while kind of leaving his way out to go later and say, well, you didn't do what I wanted him to, so now I'm getting rid of him. Maybe that explains it. I guess it doesn't explain why Obama doesn't seem to give a shit, except for it's just not on his radar screen for whatever reason, for maybe ideological reasons, maybe just personal reasons, who knows. But
I don't really want to make the show about Obama. We can.
And I don't want to leave this at his feet because every president's fucked up with this.
Absolutely.
I mean, you go back to the bonus army of the 20s. I mean, we've been fucking over our veterans so long, it's like a national tradition.
Absolutely.
At this our Memorial Day weekend, I think it behooves us to remember it's not a extra day off of work for nothing. I mean, Jesus. It's supposed to. And so I think it's very relevant, and if you've got one of those yellow ribbons in your car, you might want to listen up, because this is actually supporting troops. You know, I mean, it just amazes me how through the years it's become just the agency everyone loves to ignore for some reason.
Well, I'm with you. It's not an agency, by the way. It's a department. It's a full-on department. It's not a thing people get wrong. It is not part of the DOD.
Secretary of Veterans Affairs.
Yeah, in charge of VA is a secretary. This is they for all they have, for how much pomp and circumstance and importance they have. The fact that they're performing this poorly. It's not some agency under some bureau under some department.
No, they run themselves.
This is a full-on department. They have no excuse whatsoever. Now, again, I'm not defending Obama. I'm just saying Obama has tolerated so much shit from his cabinet, from Hillary to Geithner to
I guess
Holder.
It's not surprising in life.
I'd be surprised if he responded. I mean, he didn't support the guy. Just like, well, he doesn't seem to be doing a good job, but he seems to be looking. It's just Obama. He has no concept of management. Yeah. I think this has been a huge problem under him in many ways. Just every one of these corrupt ass secretaries does whatever they want. And Obama just kind of signs off on it. And then he's surprised that the Fox News of the world are blaming everything on him. Well, hey, dude.
Kind of like Captain Sebelius. Oh, you're going to have that website ready, right? Oh, yeah, no problem. Okay.
Oh, wait, shit, what happened?
See you in November rollout, I guess. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, and again, yeah, there's another one. Thank you. But the thing is, the way I've come to see Obama in kind of recent months is he's Bush with a better speechwriter and a teleprompter.
Yeah, Bush used to look down at his note cards instead, yeah.
Right, but see, Bush was, he's just a stupid...
Who knew that whole, the commanding way he used to seem to look at the audience in the eyes just because he's looking up at his teleprompter?
You're right, but, for Bush, Bush was inarticulate. He couldn't tie two words together. He had the vocabulary of an eighth grader. We need to stop the terrorists before they get nuclear weapons. And everyone thought he was an idiot for that. Now, he was an idiot, but you're articulate.
Question. Are we able to put food on our families? And is our children getting educated?
Educated. Now, right, but see,
yeah.
Just because you're inarticulate, that doesn't mean you're stupid. Now, don't get me wrong. Bush was dumber than a box of rocks. I don't want to think I'm implying Bush was some sort of genius, because he wasn't.
Yeah.
But you could see right there, it was oh yeah, President Dumbass. And then, don't even get me started on his secretaries and the shit they got away with.
Oh, I know.
Rumsfeld,
in your direction.
Paulson, Cheney. these guys, wow.
Icing on the shit.
Alberto Gonzalez, yeah. But
good.
All that being said, with Obama, I really don't see any competence improvement. What it is, he's got good speechwriters and a teleprompter, so he sounds all intelligent because he knows how to read a goddamn teleprompter. But as far as management capacity, I'm really not seeing it. It's just scandal after scandal. And, Fox News loves to speculate, but really I believe that 80 to 90% of what's happened under him was just pure incompetence and just oversight. Whether it's Benghazi, Fast and the Furious, the IRS thing, the NSA, Now it's like he's just sitting there playing with his earwax while all what's
his standard answer every time it comes out? Well, I only knew about it when I read about it in the news. Really?
Okay,
wow.
Here's my response to that, and this is not aimed personally at Obama. Okay, hold on. I think we have to hold politicians to a certain standard. Okay, if you're a corporate executive, like say on Wall Street or a large oil firm, and these are not anyone's favorite people, by the way. These are not guys that anybody likes. Okay, these are not guys that
you could charitably describe them as comic book evil, but anyway.
Right, they're not known for they're not stereotyped as having the highest form of integrity and credibility. Right?
No.
But if shit's going down, if there's fraud and corruption and, embezzlement, whatever, in your corporation, and you get caught doing that, you're going to jail. You can't, send your accountant to jail. It's oh, I didn't know about it. Okay, that's great. Well, you got 15 years to find. You got 15 years to learn how to know about it.
That's a different show because no one actually did in the financial scandal. But anyway.
No. If they can catch it, they know how to get out of it. But legally speaking, you cannot claim ignorance. This is actually something when Enron came through, this legal precedent was set because they tried to say, it was just the accountants. Okay, that's great. Here's an orange jumpsuit. Let's learn about how we watch our accounts. They're full of shit, but you can't claim ignorance is the point. Why don't we hold politicians to the same standard? Why he's claiming ignorance overall? Then why are you president?
Yeah, and his mandate to his underling, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, ought to be, can everyone at the top who, like you said, has been around, because obviously this is an area in which we're going to agree, because obviously the job they're doing is not even remotely acceptable, and that should be enough reason. Well, we can't just throw at everyone who knows anything about the system because we're not. I don't want them to be there if they know the system.
Yeah,
because the system's fucked up and broken.
That
bad thing in my mind.
Scoring any points? Yeah.
I have experience. Yeah, you've experienced being a shitheel, and you don't know what you're asked from a hole in the ground. Please give me a break. And it's like, why aren't we? This is and here's the thing. I don't want to get off on the whole Benghazi thing, but you know what? You always talk about 4 dead Americans. How many veterans do you say died because of these waiting lists? 40-something? And that's just the ones we know about.
That was in one place.
Give me a break. So we're talking on a scale. If you're just talking about the human death factor involved, way more than Benghazi. So, and these are things
And
that
it
affect
helps
Americans here.
and no one's shooting at them.
Right. Right.
There's not Al Qaeda dudes with grenade launchers involved in this.
Yeah, it's not like I walk into a VA and some Al Qaeda hits them with an IED when they go in the lobby of that place.
No, they die from just negligence and poor judgment and incompetence on the part of the bureaucrats.
What kind of country are we that they're just sitting there dying from preventable disease? Well, they just wait for care. I mean, it's unacceptable.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about increase in demand. Now, of course, there's been VA studies that, of course, after every war, you have kind of a flare-up, and there's kind of two flare-ups. The first one is immediately after, when you have guys coming back, missing limbs, PTSD, whatever. The second one is about 30, 40 years later, when these same people, the same veterans, and I shouldn't say guys, because there are women veterans too now, they're a much larger proportion than in past wars.
Oh, yes.
Then they become older, they become seniors, and they're still eligible for care, so then they need a lot more, maybe not service-connected medical care, but medical care. So after every war, and unfortunately with the Vietnam vets, I feel like that was actually one of the biggest embarrassments in our history. Not only did we go there, we had no business being there. We completely fucked up that war strategically. But then when the veterans came back, because there was kind of a culture of this was a stupid war, we just let the veterans die. Well, it's not the veterans' fault it was a stupid war.
They still bled, for America, they thought. I mean, it's like, yeah. And that's the thing, the politics of the war shouldn't matter at all. I mean, they earn the benefit by going over there. I'm not going over there, so they deserve it more than I do, Yeah.
I hear you. And so the increase in demand, but this particular war, particularly Desert Storm and, not Desert Storm, Operation Iraqi Freedom, of course, and Operation Enduring Freedom, so Afghanistan and Iraq, those two places, I think we have this mushroom effect of just demand for care. And that a lot of that has to do, is kind of with my specialty, is with mental health.
That's a big one, yeah.
Right. Because if you look at the history, until the post-Vietnam era, we didn't even recognize mental health as a service-connected issue.
They just called it battle fatigue, shell shock back in World War I.
World War I, it was shell shock. World War II, I want to say battle fatigue was World War II.
Yeah.
So even I think even Vietnam, they recognize it maybe 10 years later that, hey, maybe if you've spent 3-4 years over there watching people get mangled and being shot at and not knowing if you're going to live to see the next 5 minutes, maybe that might fuck with your head a little bit.
Maybe it might just a tad. Yeah, just a tad.
There's all that preparation and training, but you can't really prepare for seeing just walking behind a guy that's that you've been sleeping in the same like on the same bunk bed with for the last 4 months, and all of a sudden, boom, he's in a million pieces, and you're still saying what the fuck just happened?
Yeah,
that tends to get it, and I'm kind of being comical about this for relief. It's really not funny. It's very serious, and I've worked with these people. I've met them in both Vietnam and Iraq, and people that have come back. And on top of being physically crippled, they're just so mentally disturbed. It's very difficult for them to do.
They can't function. Yeah, they can't. They can't have relationships. They can't hold jobs. They can't. They have to stay barricaded in their house. They can't go out and go shopping. It's really, really bad for some of these guys.
Well, there's even more to it than that. For example, we had issues here in San Diego. For those who don't know, there are parts of San Diego out in the desert that geographically very much resemble Iraq. It's a desert, sand cliffs. There's kind of chaparral and a lot of desert vegetation. It's hot.
When I see videos of Afghanistan, even parts of that, yeah, it looks
more so Iraq than Afghanistan, but yeah, I hear you. Even in parts of Afghanistan. So what happens is I've read these stories of guys getting busted because they're driving 120 miles an hour out there, or they roll a car because they did that. And when they bust them, what turns out what happened is they were having a flashback, because in Afghanistan or in Iraq, in the parts where these Marines were, where they're fighting the war, you have to drive that fast, because that way if you run over a roadside bomb, it's going to blow up and it's not going to get you, right. And you're going to be too fast for a sniper or for an RPG. So they have the flashlight. It's not their fault. They need help, and they have untreated mental health conditions. Now, the good news is at least now we recognize these mental health conditions, whereas after World War II, and Korea is another big one. Korea, and even Vietnam, a lot of these guys came back and they were told to suck it up and stop being a pussy.
Right. There's a lot of stigma even
Really?
today. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I know.
The guy told you go back there for a couple months yourself, and then see who you want to tell to suck it up and not be a pussy. He's like, give me a break.
Yeah.
So
but even asking for care, they're already dealing with all that, even to get that far.
Right. So where I'm going with that is a lot of the time when they do finally come in and seek help, they've already been beat down, not just by their experience over there, by their experience here. They've had legal problems because they've gotten in fights, because of their driving, their behavior, because they're, and a lot of these guys, we forget, they go over there when they're 18.
19, yeah, very formative time in your life.
Right. They come back and they're 25 and their only adult experience is being in a war for 7 or 8 years.
It's shot at, shooting people, bombs blowing up, people dying, yeah.
They also have zero financial responsibility. Let's not forget that.
Very true.
I mean, they may be married, they've come back here and there, and they've gotten married, they may even have kids, but they have no concept of, supporting themselves financially, plus all that PTSD, all that battle aggression, because that's what allowed them to survive over there for 8 years. They come back here, they're going to need some sort of transition back into civilian life.
Right.
And not only do we not have that, but I've seen a lot of the documentaries on this, that while you're actually, the VA is starting to become more accepting of mental health effects, but the military itself, the DoD, just has no tolerance for that. There's so much stigma against anyone that becomes traumatized, and a lot of it, this is getting better now. When we were still in Iraq, they were so short on troops that it was impossible to get any sort of transfer or discharge because you were traumatized, because then they'd have nobody, because everyone there is traumatized.
They'd stop loss you, yeah, exactly.
Right. So I think a lot of where I was going with all this is a lot of the increased demand is that we recognize this is an issue. We don't just tell these guys to suck it up. That's a good thing. But we haven't recognized it fully, so a lot of times it's very far gone. So in that sense, slightly in the VA's defense, they're dealing with a lot more than even they've ever dealt with after any other war or any other military action. So that's the case. However, if you're in 2014 and you're still using paper records,
right,
and
they didn't change to meet that different need at all. It's the same VA that the Vietnam vets were dealing with when we weren't acknowledging all those mental issues, and so it just isn't equipped. And how they responded to it on the back end, so getting in is a problem, seeing a doctor is a problem. Now when you see a doctor, I was just watching another story on this the other day, you just get thrown pills at you, and then you get sent home again. So now we're creating addicts.
That's medicine in general. I mean,
that's creating addicts, So maybe they weren't mentally fucked up, but they had PTSD, but now they have a chemical dependency on top of everything else. So it's just, it's this snowball effect. It's just horrible on so many different levels. I don't even know where to start.
I mean, it's a bureaucracy. And I think, honestly, it's a good thing that we're, as a country, I think, finally, this is coming into the front line, and we're recognizing, hey, this is not working. This is terrible. This is an embarrassment. This is mistreating our veterans. This is just backing out of our promises. And I feel like a big piece of it, you said the politics of the war don't matter. They don't, but this does have an impact on the politics of war, because whether we like to acknowledge it or not, one of the big allures of people going in the military is they like the GI Bills and they like the VA benefits, and they know that, if you go in the military, then even if you serve, say, 2 terms, you don't go all the way to 20 years in our military time, there's still some benefits that'll follow you for the rest of your life. And I have friends who are veterans who those benefits are decent if they would work the way they're supposed to. Right. It's not necessarily, it's not a bad deal in that sense. I can't argue with that. So if this is frontline and this is what you're seeing in the news, VA benefits are sucking. It takes forever to sign up. They treat you like a beggar. Who's going to go in the military?
Right.
I mean, people will still.
And they're already having issues getting volunteers these days.
There's already now. Of course, there's other reasons to go in the military. That's not the only one. But it's a quantitative deal. You're eliminating one of the major incentives, maybe not the number one, but one of the major incentives people have to join the military.
I've heard that cited, yes.
Right. And if you have that issue, maybe probably one of the top 3, if you have that problem, what you're doing is you're raising the costs of war. Because now you're going to have to either overhaul this system or face a chronic recruitment shortage. And as you pointed out, Erically, we already have a chronic recruitment shortage. So that, to me, in kind of as a positive side effect of this, that politicians like Dick Cheney, who have their hands in all the military contractors and Halliburton, they're going to have a very difficult time. They already have a difficult time selling war. They're going to have a much more difficult time selling it, because it really, one of the things it comes down to, we just can't afford our war budget. And I didn't say military budget. I said war budget. We can't afford to spend the amount of resources that we spend on the military. And, or on the war, I'm sorry. And it doesn't stop with military action, obviously. This is stuff that follows us for 40, 50 years.
And that's what people always forget. Yeah, yeah. It's like an installment plan, an aggravation installment plan. This is going to keep coming due every year, year after year, after the conflict's long over. And I think, actually, it's funny you say that about policy. You've seen public policy with Libya, with Syria, with Ukraine. They haven't had the American people behind them to go, yeah, let's get in there and get involved. I think, in large part, because people know how fucked up the system is.
Well, they still have Iraq, thankfully, fresh in their minds. Like, hey, that doesn't work. There's a reason.
It just keeps getting worse with these scandals. It just keeps getting worse.
And that's, in a sense, again, I'm not happy about the way the VA is working, but in a sense, it's kind of a relief to me, because I feel like after Vietnam, we had a very, very short memory after that war. By the time Reagan was in office, we weren't fighting wars, but we were already fucking with places and, Grenada and all that. And then Bush Sr., of course, Desert Storm.
Right.
So
when he was vice president under Reagan, they were best buddies.
Right.
He was a useful idiot then, but 8 years later, no, not anymore.
Right. So when you get to that point, and I don't know if they're best buddies, I'm not sure about that, but anyway, it's beside the point. What I'm saying is, we had a very short memory with why it's not okay to go stick our dick in every beehive.
Right.
And I feel like this era, the Iraq and Afghanistan era, one, fighting two front wars doesn't work. Call the Germans in 1944, ask them how well that goes. Yeah. It's reality.
Yeah.
You have a shortage of resources. But more importantly, it's just the way we recognize what's going on. We recognize the costs. We recognize we didn't get anything done. We recognize those countries are worse off. We recognize that this is directly tied to terrorism, is directly tied to the global situation and creating breeding grounds for Al-Qaeda and for people who do want to hurt us. And then we look at the domestic toll with, PTSD and mental illness and, of course, the VA. So my hope is that this kind of makes us lose appetite for war for a little bit longer at this time.
I hope so.
That we learn that this is not, I've always known this. Well, not always, but as an adult, I've studied political science, and I always tend to look at things quantitatively. And this is something that, I catch a lot of flack from people who are emotional about politics, whether they're right or left. But I always look at, okay, well, I understand the need for this, but what are the costs? Like, what do you mean, what are the costs? We're defending our country. No, that's great, but you didn't answer the question. What are the costs? Oh, we need to help the children. Same shit. What are the costs? But we're finally we're seeing the beginnings of thinking this way as a society. So I guess where we're kind of heading with this in the beginning is people opting out of these services.
And we were reading the quote earlier, the soldier just simply going, you know what, it's just, I'm waiting too long, the care isn't sufficient, I'm just opting out of this benefit. I'm writing it off. Because it's not worth my time anymore. I could die, I could miss a chronic condition. And it's very serious. People are talking about their health, obviously, it's important. And it should be important. But that is, yes, one example of people simply just opting out of the system. And now you're reneging on your promises to people.
Right, but again, that's something that I feel like is going to become visible to younger generations that are considering military service and to whom that's a deciding factor. And they're going to say, look, why am I going to sign up to do something where the supposed benefits, look at my uncle, look at my father, look at my grandfather, they completely fucked them over.
They don't have
or
to
they're having
yeah.
opt out. This is not something you can hide, folks. I'm sorry. This is not something you can sweep under the rug and just act like it never happened. Mm-mm.
They turn into Dr. Evil. How about no? How about no? Yeah.
So that kind of brings us to, we're good on bitching about the VA, I think. I think there's not really a lot of disagreement on this, except that they really, I think, before they do anything else, before any politician makes any other decision about this, they just need to modernize. And actually, there's one more thing I want to talk about here, and that's the Republican plan, actually. You gotta love how Republicans are always talking about fiscal conservatism and less spending.
Oh, yeah.
But something like this comes up in there. First one's, let's throw more money at it.
And Obama did that, and look where we are.
Well, Obama throwing more money at something at least is consistent.
True.
Republicans don't bitch. You're going to bitch so much about fiscal conservatism and accountability and not throwing more money. It should try not to do that. What
an example of a Democrat going, I got a really bad idea, and a Republican going, and I can make it shittier.
Exactly.
Throw even more money. Let's double down. Why not give the same insurance bureaucrats more budget?
So one of the things that I see going on, I just read about this with Rep. Jeff Miller from Florida, who's the chair of the Armed Services Committee, or I'm sorry, not Armed Services, the VA Committee, I apologize, in the House, and of course, old McCain, the guy's still alive, who is the John the Walking Corpse McCain. He's the chairman of the VA Committee in the Senate, and they've each suggested, okay, any veteran that cannot be seen in a timely fashion in a VA medical center, now the VA has to pay for him, for that, or for her, for that veteran, to be seen by private doctors, to be seen, so it works like an HMO, to be seen out of network. Now, I agree that if they can't be seen, then they need to be seen someplace else. It's their health. I get that. Problem is, and there's no way, these guys are career politicians, they get it. If they don't get this, they need to be kicked out of office today.
And which before, by the way, this was only a benefit offered people when they were a significant geographic distance away from a facility. And then they were allowed to do that. So it was not a benefit extended to hardly any people before.
So if this were a regulation against a private company, let's say, a private corporation, at least I could see the reasoning, okay, this is an incentive. You fuck up, you're backlogged, you can't see them in a timely fashion, then you get to pay for them to go someplace else. But the VA has a federal budget. So if you start, seeing people out of network is more expensive. That's just a fact of life. So if you're considering the number of their backlogs, and I agree with Shinseki or with whoever said it with Miller that this is a tip of the iceberg. Now you're going to have millions of veterans going outside the system, and actually a lot of them are going to try. There's ways to work the system and go out of network because they can be seen faster and they can see the doctor they want to see and not the VA doctor. I mean, this is unintended consequences, but they're real. And it's not like the VA is going to fix itself in response to this, Mr. McCain. I'm sorry.
No.
But I know you're,
Look, all the laws base, you're going to want them back and do better. No.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know the dementia's setting in on John McCain there, but how is that supposed to motivate the VA? I mean, if the VA is not spending your money, Mr. McCain, is not spending its own money, it's spending my money. Now,
it's great. He just fixed our problem for us. No change required.
Yes, now, I don't have a problem with that as a government expenditure, by the way, veterans benefits. But just saying, okay, well, if you can't pay for it, then you pay someone else to do it. Oh, and by the way, that's 3 times the cost. You're just going to bankrupt the VA. And when you bankrupt the VA, that's just going to create an incentive for you to give them more money to the same bureaucrats that are still using paper records. Really?
Yeah.
And,
of course, we're not going to get outside of the box thinking from a guy like that.
Okay, but see, this is the problem. You have Obama saying, "Oh, it's not working. Well, let's do an investigation and let's
form agencies on it. And in about 2 years, we'll have a report.
And then we'll write
a report that you can order."
Right,
that's
and then we'll wipe your ass with, and then you
he's out of office and nobody gives a shit.
And then we're going to write the VA a polite letter saying what they can do differently to serve the veterans better.
Pretty please.
It's
these changes.
Sick. It's not funny.
Yeah.
And then for the Republicans, it's like, oh well, let's just force them to pay someone else to do it.
Yeah, and speaking of private enterprise in government has always said such good results. Why not do it again?
And that's another issue. Is just because they have to pay someone outside to do it does not mean they're going to pay who the veteran wants to go see. So now you're opening the door to corruption, and the VA is like a cockroach nest of corruption at the high level. So now you're going to start choosing medical centers that they have an interest in paying. So now they're going to start outsourcing their benefits. And I don't understand a problem with outsourcing, but it's not even supposed to be outsourced. It's supposed to be whoever the veteran wants to see. So you're trying to put out the fire by throwing gasoline on it.
I love how the neocon idea of private enterprise taking over government function is increasing a government budget and throwing it at entrenched business interests.
Well, it's called fascism. I mean,
that's free market, right? No.
It's called fascism. Mussolini figured this out, so, I mean, it's nothing new.
Yeah. So
that's I don't know, how does anyone even call that free market? That's beyond me.
But I mean, you can see just there's no new ideas anywhere, and that you could see where if you're a veteran, you're like, I'm done, I'm out. You promised it to me, you fucked me over. I can't change the past. At least now I can do what I have to do to get seen and get cared for properly. Whatever. But a lot of people don't have that ability. They don't have the money. They don't have the resources. Whatever, and they're dying. So that's where we are.
It's not just the money or the resources they don't have. They don't have the understanding of the system. Again, a lot of these guys are guys who never went to college. They went in straight at 18. They're working class people. They come back. They're struggling. They can't make money. They're not educated enough to understand the system. Now, yeah, they could opt out, but then where are they going to go? So
a lot of them, too, by the way, when they got all those GI Bill benefits and whatnot up front, like they went out and bought brand new. I've seen this so many times. They go out and buy brand new trucks. They go out and buy, all these personal electronics and stuff because they think, oh, look at all this money I have. It's like, really, when you get that big check for your signing bonus and everything, you should put that shit in the bank and just leave it alone. Because eventually you're going to be out of the service and you won't be able to hold a job. That's what happens to these guys. Not necessarily.
But the thing is, I hear what you're saying. There is kind of an element of institutionalization with the military, as much as I hate to use that term. Because for 8 years, again, these guys go in very young. They've probably never lived on their own. They're never supported themselves. They're going straight from their dad's house, their mom's house.
And they have no budgeting skills and get handed all that money.
Who has budgeting skills when they're 19?
I sure as hell.
No. Normal. They may have some understanding, but no skills. And they go in the military. Military life is very different from civilian life. All your expenses are paid. You can stay on the ship, in the barracks, whatever. You have if you're married, and even if you're married and you have a family, you have your housing allowance, your food allowance, your daycare allowance. You're out most of the time. You're not there. When you come back, you have your money. You're paid. You're not paid very well, but you're paid money. You have no place to spend it when you're out there, especially when you're on a combat deployment. You come back, now you can go blow that money drinking with your buddies.
Right.
And then you're right back on deployment. Now you live that way for 8 years, and that 8 years constitutes your entire adulthood. You come back into civilian life, you're supposed to just magically understand, okay, you know what? This paycheck I have, which is like $12 an hour from some shit job, it's not just for your food, it's for your rent, your apartment where your wife and your kid live.
Yeah.
This is a little more important than just your food.
Times they've been paying that the whole time anyway, but still. They had money because they weren't spending it otherwise.
They weren't. Whatever. They were paying it. Well, their military housing allowance was doing it. And now they actually have to get an actual paycheck and budget it. These are very different things. A housing allowance doesn't go toward anything other than housing. It's that's what I'm saying. It's institutionalized, not in that you don't get money, but in that it's kind of the budgeting is done for you.
Right.
And this idea, the military kind of, and it works while you're in the military. It creates drones. They're supposed to do what they're told. Because if every soldier out there in combat is thinking about how they would better fight this battle, you're going to lose.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Yeah, and they're just They're just cut back to civilian life without any kind of transitional sort of assistance.
And they're fucked up to boot.
Right. Medically, mentally, whatnot. Yeah.
Everything.
Exactly.
Right. So that's it. Again, there was a time 50 years ago, 40 years ago, when the skills you learned in the military are actually very useful in the civilian workforce. You come back now and you don't have a college degree, you're like, well, I worked on airplanes in the military. Big fucking deal. And again, I'm not trying to downplay the importance and the sacrifice of these guys, but it's reality. You come back still with that 1960s mentality that if you're someone who served for 8 years, you're set for life, and you're not. You're fucked.
Well, the only thing I've heard, just use IT as an example, the way the military handles their technology is so different that a lot of times these guys, they get jobs in IT for just contractors that do military work. So it's like, even then, you know what I mean?
How many of those are there?
And that's the thing. Yeah, there's only so many to go around. I guess we can ask Edward Snowden how many. But
there you go. Yeah. So
if you can find him, anyways.
I can find him. It's just, is he going to talk to us? It's another one. That's another guest we'd like on this show. But
Putin.
I I'm gonna go have a glass with Vladimir Vladimirovich.
Yeah, back at home. You guys are from the same hood, aren't you?
We are. He's from St. Petersburg, so yeah.
Yeah. Meet him at the old vodka tavern or whatever they have over there.
I was 9 years old when I left. Thank you. Even I wasn't hanging out.
Oh,
at the vodka
come on!
tavern.
No! Bullshit! You and I both knew you were at the vodka tavern.
At 9 years old, I think you may have the wrong opinion of Russia. See, in Russia, in order for something to be considered legally alcohol, it has to be, I believe, over 12%, which means most beer is not legally alcohol. So when I was 9, it was the beer tavern, not the liquor tavern.
Oh, right. You got to graduate to this vodka tavern.
Yeah, when you're 17. That's the drinking age. Anyway, moving on, because, I mean, like I said, this is a topic that we can cover for a long time, but I think we've covered all the basics of it. And like I said, I feel like the amount of clusterfuck that this is, just the technology, the lack of modernization, the lack of management, and really the lack of solutions, you really kind of have to take the axe to this department. And remember, this is not the DoD, has nothing to do with military, with defense. It's just axe them and start over. Even I, being Mr. Radical Libertarian, I don't say that about a lot of things, because I understand that things have to be transitioned gradually. But here I think we've tried to transition gradually multiple times, and the VA just fights it. They fight it tooth and nail because they don't want to do it, and they gotta go.
Again, I want to talk to anyone who doesn't look at this and say it's not broken. That's what we got to
see. That's the thing, but I don't think anyone does say that. I think that people have very different ideas for what to do with it, and the closer they are to it in terms of responsibility, the more likely they're saying, well, let's do a nice audit and write a nice report, because they know that if truth really comes out to the surface, they're getting cooked. And I think this may yet end up being the biggest scandal of Obama's presidency. Because I think a lot of the reason, actually, I think I may know why no one's dealt with it. Because no one wants to be the guy that had to deal with it.
Right.
Even though it's been a problem for 40, 50 years, if you're the president on whom it all blew up, you're going to go down in history as the guy who had the VA scandal, and the boring political scientist saying, actually the five guys, shut up. It was all Obama's fault.
Right.
So, taking it for what it is, I can see where it's just kind of like the poverty line. The poverty line is still calculated off of prices of food and not housing, because it started in the 50s, because no one wants to be the guy that adjusted under whom poverty in the U.S. triples.
Even though it kind of has.
It's not even whether or not it really has. It's that if you calculate it wrong, and you calculate it using obsolete numbers, and then you adjust it right, now you're actually having to deal with a problem which before you could sweep under the rug. Same thing with the VA here. And it's, I mean, like I said, I don't really care if some politician or some bureaucrat gets stuck with it. That's their problem, because we're talking about lives. Remember, the lives of veterans here.
Yeah.
But I can kind of see their incentive, and I think the more this is pushed on, and the more this is brought out in the open to where you can't sweep it under the rug. Yeah, it might cost a few politicians their careers. I don't care. It's got to get fixed.
It has to. It should be a national priority right now.
So another wonderful bureaucracy that we were meaning to talk about, which kind of runs along the same lines, arguably equally important, perhaps not as necessary in my book. Joe may disagree. Is the bureaucracy of federal education.
Well, and I want to back up a little bit, because everyone always makes it seem like it's way more federal than it is. Isn't it largely just sort of funding and then standards? I don't know.
Well,
there's not one federal agency that rules them all. I mean, ultimately, each state still has a lot of say-so over their own, don't they?
Okay, see, this is my concern with what you just said, just solely with what you just said. Oh, isn't it just funding and standards? See, there is no just before those two terms. If I'm the federal government, and I'm going to give you money, let me finish, please. I'm going to give you money, and you can opt out. You can choose not to take it, just like with Medicaid and all that. You could choose not to take it, but then good luck finding it somewhere else, and you're competing with the 49 other states that did. I love how government likes to make it look like things are opt-in, opt-out, like you have an option.
I get it.
You don't.
I get that part. No, I do, but people have...
I do, but I want to make sure our listeners do. It's kind of like the housing bubble, and like with the Federal Reserve and all that, and then blaming people who took out shitty loans to buy a house. Well, you couldn't buy a house without a shitty loan, because all their production of shitty loans blew up the prices of housing.
Right, and that's what they were pushing on people. Yes.
That's part of it too, but even just the effect on macroeconomics alone. So same thing here with education. You can opt out, but how are you going to keep up with the 49 states that opted in?
Well, so, what kicked this off was a thing that I've seen that's new. And I actually asked the teacher about that I know today, and I was talking to him about it because he actually has been teaching this stuff, called the Common Core standards.
Oh,
and apparently this is only right now, it's like language arts / social studies and math only.
No, those don't matter. Those are not standards.
Well, I wasn't arguing that. I was just stating fact. For those two things. And I guess I'll confess, this is one topic that makes me feel stupid because I'm not an educator. I did pretty okay in school, in high school. Some college, but I've always been a decent student with the old method, let's say. But obviously, the old way wasn't kind to everyone, and the old way had its problems. And I'll say the old way meaning like just the standard rote memorization type of way, and where everyone kind of has the same answers and all that. But I guess the idea behind the Common Core is deductive reasoning and critical analysis of things, and not just 5 times 3 equals 15, and memorizing that that's a fact, but breaking down why. And like, oh well, if 15 is 7 plus 8, and 5 is 2 plus 3, and these are that and that. So to someone who learned things the way I did, and I think pretty sure the way you did, it's really, really different. And it's funny that I've seen such universal anger from the likes of, let's say, Louis C.K., who's not a Republican by any means, from hard righters and hard lefters, whereas people like Jeb Bush are basically sticking up for it. It's a very divisive thing, it seems like, as it's being rolled out.
I don't see it as being all that divisive at all. What I see, first of all, it's another one of those, one party says, I got a really shitty idea. And everyone's saying, and I can make it so much shittier. I mean, and I should say divisive. A lot of people are agreeing and hating it. That's kind of where I was going with
it. It's amazing how many people are agreeing and hating it, but there's still those who stick up for it.
Well, so, first of all, this has its roots in No Child Left Behind. And I have yet to meet a teacher.
Yeah.
I have yet to meet a teacher that thought No Child Left Behind was a good idea. Teacher, educator, anyone that does education science, school district, no one thought that was a good idea. And the problem with it, obviously, of course, you're rolling out federal standards, lots of standardized testing, saying basically the idea behind it is the idea of evidence-based practice, and not a lot of people are familiar with that, but it's something I rail against a lot as a social scientist. The idea is, look, here is something that seems to work. We have evidence that this is effective. We don't know what the costs are. We don't know what the confounding variables are. We don't know exactly why it's effective, but it's effective. So let's do it everywhere.
Do it everywhere, right, to everyone.
That's EVP. It's
everywhere to everyone. That's relevant. I want to get back to that later.
Yes. And the problem is, a lot of times when you read in the media, and not just, I'm not talking about, like, propaganda. I'm talking real news as real as they get, right? You hear about, or like even campaigns, studies show that students who do this are more likely to succeed than those who do that. Who fucking cares?
Right.
Correlation does not imply causation. And every time I see this shit, and I comment on it, and I ask people, okay, I want to see the data. I want to see your confounding variables. I want to see the demographics on these students. I want to see those. And they just freak out and call me names and run away.
And I want to see the results, too.
Right.
Apply these policies, and what's your result?
Well, no. See, you can't do that. You can't apply it to the entire educational system as a test. This is not advanced. These are children. These are not lab rats.
Yeah.
So what No Child Left Behind did essentially is it said, okay, in the classroom, here's certain methods that seem to work on 40% of students, which is the largest chunk. Like you test 5 methods, and these work on 40%, this works on 30%, this works on 10, and then nothing. So we're going to make teachers use this 40% method all the time.
Right.
Well, you just left 60% of kids in the dust.
Yes, you did.
It's kind of has to be up to the teacher what method they use. That's why they have an education in being an educator, and you, Mr. Bush, do not.
Yes. Yeah, the idea of him being an educator.
I don't want to think about that. But the
he should be the educated, but he's not. Anyway.
He's not that either. But what really, he didn't write the law. We have to give him credit for that.
Well, no.
What you really have going on, and I disagree with you that this is not relevant, that it's just funding and standards, is you have bureaucrats with cushy jobs in Washington, D.C., at the Department of Education, setting education standards for places they haven't even flown over.
Yeah, well...
How do you... I don't even have kids. When I have kids, I don't want some bureaucrat in D.C. deciding what they're going to... I don't care what his degree is in. I don't care how many PhDs he has. Fuck off. Stay away from my kids.
Well, can I throw a question at you then?
Sure.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to anyway. And I'm going to try to frame this very carefully. There are certain things about education, certain things that, in my opinion, I'm going to qualify and underline that as often as strenuously as I can here. In my opinion, this is just one Yahoo's opinion, that should be, or at least we should try to impart these things to students. And I guess my fear is, let me try to quantify it this way. My fear is that you have 50 different states teaching 50 different versions of science, 23 of which might include God created everything. Let's say that. Or 23 in which we teach how Darwin was an evil Satan from the pit of hell. You know what I'm saying? And how, in Alabama we're learning how slavery wasn't so bad, and how the War of Northern Aggression started. And I guess my fear in, you see where I'm going with this, or my fear in just turning the states loose without any kind of oversight, and what we're having today. But here's the flip side. I want to present you with both of these and get your reaction. That's the one problem, right? The flip side is being so heavy-handed as they have been lately. No Child Left Behind, Common Core. It's pissing so many people off that we're not even dealing with each state and each county school district anymore. We're dealing with all the parents who have yanked their kids out of the system entirely and are just teaching them at home around the kitchen table. So now you've got...
God only knows.
God knows what material.
Unintentional.
Right. So now you might have like them teaching their own kid around the dinner table how black people are evil and how the KKK is the one true way. And that rhymes too, so it's catchy. It might actually catch on if there are enough kids.
I hope you didn't just start that trend.
People dumbass listen to the show. Yeah. So now instead of each state, now we're talking each little community like section might have their own education. So to me it's such a delicate balance. Maybe is a good way to put it.
Well, it is. And this is going to kind of be a lengthy response because that's a very lengthy and thought-provoking question. And first of all, I do agree with your concern that we want to teach kids. There's certain things that are objective that you kind of have to understand to get ahead. And I'm not even so concerned. Right. I'm not even so concerned about like Darwin versus God, because plenty of people think that Darwin was a psycho and that Christianity is right about everything, and they still have a decent living and they're contributing to society. I don't agree with them, but that's not even my number one concern. My concern is, yes, things you said like beliefs of intolerance and just inaccurate perceptions of history. That's a huge problem and has an effect on political thinking. And then just basics like math and language. If you can't spell worth crap and you can't add 2 + 2, what are you going to do for a job?
Because math is standard not in this country but the whole world. Math is supposed to be a universal language, right? So and science and method of science and how science is conducted, that's universal across the world. So
I agree with your concern, but we've had this meme on this show many times that once you say the word should, I'm not interested in what's coming afterwards, and of course I'm not genuinely not interested. But what you're saying is we should have these things standardized. But I'm looking this through the eyes of a realistic perspective, and I'm finding that federal and even state standards are just plain proving incapable of doing that. Now, the burden of proof is on the claimant. So no matter how hard I try, I can't prove to you that the bureaucrats will never get it right, because you can't prove that something doesn't exist or can't happen. That's Logic 101. Right. That's one of those critical thinking standards we learned in school. And
I want to make clear, I don't have an easy answer to that.
I understand.
That's the thing. I'm asking the question rhetorically.
Throwing more resources at this and changing the bureaucracy and changing legislation, not only has it not helped, it's made things progressively worse. We've had a shit education system for at least half a century. I mean, if you look at countries that really, it's a shame, it's an embarrassment that they're ahead of us, but they are.
Well, we keep losing ground. Yes.
Right. And we keep losing ground because we have this bureaucratic approach of every time we fuck up, we just double down some more on the same thing. Common Core, as you said accurately, is just a double down on No Child Left Behind, which was a terrible idea to begin with. Now we're going to introduce more. Now we're going to not only introduce teaching method standards, now we're going to introduce actual like learning standards and
Right.
like teaching, I guess, like textbook standards. It's just it isn't working. Why are you doing more of it?
From what I can gather, it's trying to teach them not just what to think, but even how to think, and that, to me, is you could see that being used for good, like how a fire can keep you warm or cook food. Or you can see it being used for evil, like because it could be a flamethrower, and you could, intentionally torch half a city, like ours just was last week. I mean, it's just such a fine line with education. It's so.
The thing is, I have
delicate.
Zero trust in bureaucrats for that, and the further they are removed from accountability, whether like federal versus state versus local, the less trust I have for them, because as we've learned with the VA and a lot of other things, people are driven by rational self-interest. And in order to do a good job, it helps to have the axe hanging over them. You're going to get fired. You're going to be held accountable. If they're not going to be held accountable, they get lazy, and they put their self-interest before the actual quality of their work.
Yeah, the one thing I clash with progressives about is that teachers should be easier to fire them.
That's that's a completely different show.
That they couldn't get rid of them. They just couldn't, even though they were way past their prime. They were senile. They obviously didn't give a shit. At that point, they've maxed out their yearly salary, and they're just waiting until retirement comes around.
That's part of it. That's kind of a different show, because a lot of teachers' union stuff has to do more with state than federal. Right. But yeah, that's another thing that's standardized. Now, when it comes to what Common Core is supposed to do for teaching them critical thinking, what I feel like it's doing, and I've seen some of the textbooks, I've seen some of the methods, and it's ridiculous. Now, the idea is we're going to make sure that every kid learns this. We're going to hold their hand and make sure that every one of them crosses the finish line, no matter how slowly they do it, which, of course, is just doubling down on No Child Left Behind. And that's why you see these weird math problems, and, you see people posting about them in blogs, and, oh, how does this, what the fuck, how did they even come up with this? No, it does make sense. If you look at it long enough and don't just knee-jerk react that Obama is the devil, you will see what they're trying to do. I'm not saying it's a good idea. There's method to it. My problem with what it's doing, and this is my problem with standardized and bureaucratized anything, is the idea behind it is we're going to make sure that all the slow kids keep up with all the fast kids.
And it always seems like it comes the accommodating under. Let me back up. Accommodating the current system, which dates back how we're teaching. And I want to get into this a little bit, and I wanted to bring a guest in for this, but he wasn't available for that, because the model that we have in this country dates back to the 1800s, where you literally just have a teacher talking, and there's a class full of students, and they're all listening to the same thing at the same time in the same way. They're all doing the same work. That approach, that's why we keep getting all this trouble, isn't it? It's where you say,
no.
And I want to ask one question to you, though, real fast. Were you in school? When you were in school, did you think to yourself, boy, what we need right now to make things better are more standardized tests? No, you weren't thinking that.
That shit was such a waste of time. And I remember that.
It was just a big suck of a day, right? It was a waste of a day.
Well, they were really easy for me. So
me too, actually, but it was still a waste of a day.
This is boring. Like, why are we doing this?
But I guess so. Let me ask you one question then. Wouldn't a better solution be instead of, let's say, applying the same to all? Why are we still doing this whole thing where it's only certain times of the year, it's only certain times of the day, there's not flexibility of when and how and what kind of different groups or maybe even different tracks instead of lumping everyone in the same grade or learning everything the same?
We do have quite a bit of that. I mean, you can take advanced classes, you have special education. We've tried to apply a lot of that. So the thing is, I disagree with you that we have this hyper-standardized system. We're actually maybe on our way there. I don't think we've always had it. Maybe in the last 5 to 10 years this has happened. Because, coming from a different country, having gone to school in a different country, it's actually way less standardized here than it is there. The standards there are very strict, whereas here, it's not just the standards, it's the aim of these standards is that It's literally no child left behind. Every kid that's slow, that's not keeping up, has to at least pass. Now, there's two gigantic problems with that. The first one, actually, they really boil down to the same thing. It's just one gigantic problem. And that is lack of resources. You don't have, if you had the teachers and the money and the programs and the resources to actually accomplish that, you wouldn't need these goddamn standards. Yeah, you might need to fine tune here and there, fire a few union stewards to get rid of the bad teachers. But in general, most teachers want to succeed. They want to teach the kids. They want to help them. They want to make sure they succeed. I'm not saying everyone's going to be a straight A student, but if you had the resources to accomplish that, for the most part, you would. You're not accomplishing it because you just don't have the time. You don't have the money. And the other issue that ties into that is confounding variables like these kids' family lives, crime, just their own economic ability.
Standards,
yeah. Right, that kind of thing. Language barriers are a big one. We're a country of immigrants and refugees, and if they come into the 7th grade, they don't speak English, they're going to fall behind.
Yes, they frequently do. Yeah.
Right, so that, and the standards don't help them, by the way.
No,
but
no.
if you have a school that's in, like a suburb that's a bunch of rich white people versus an urban school that's just full of refugee and transitional populations, you can't apply the same standardized test to them and then judge them the same way. That's just plain
And that's
stupid.
the other thing. We do have a very have and have not system, and we always have from the ground up. It's just
right. But what I'm saying is we have that, and we need to deal with it, and we need to act on the fact that we have it, not standardized testing, and then say those schools suck. No, the
standardized tests
suck.
and non-standardized schools. Yeah, it's just
Yes. Agreed. Now, going back to what I was saying, though, so in trying to keep the back of the line moving, to keep them, to keep these kids from falling behind, you're going to take what limited resources you have, and you're going to allocate them to the kids that are doing very poorly. And a lot of times they're doing poorly because of things that are completely out of the educator's control. Whether it's undiagnosed disabilities, like you said, socioeconomic status, language barriers, these Common Core standards are not going to help them with that.
No.
Meanwhile, you're losing all the kids that should be ahead, that could get ahead, because now they're having to sit through this shit.
It almost sounds like they're just when they write these standards, they just assume a normal American kid who speaks English when they write them. And it's like, wow, boy, are you out of touch. I mean, that's
where have you been? Where have you been?
You're up to like logic and this and that and all in English. It's like, you've got people that kids are hungry, they can't concentrate. Kids, they don't speak English. Kids that they're just not addressing that at all. Oh, well, we'll just have more special ed teachers. But with no kind of framework to help them and how to teach them. Give me a break.
And another big problem with state schools, and it's more of a state level problem, is you don't have a lot of services that schools used to have, because every time you've had cuts now, the teachers unions, their response, and people praise teachers unions. I despise them, and it's not because of a problem with education for teachers. It's because these unions are so entrenched and powerful that they sit on their thumbs waiting for the cuts to happen. They won't work with the administrators, and I've actually had a couple teachers that have told me this. They won't work with the school administration. They won't work with the school boards. They just wait for the state to cut their funding, and then when it's time to apply the cuts, they go to the administrators and the school board and they say, anyone but us. You will not fuck with teacher salaries, or we will make your life hell. And then you're surprised there's no after-school programs. And then you're surprised the facilities haven't been renovated in 20 years and they're going to pass bond measures for that. Well, what are you going to... You can't print money to school. I'm sorry, that doesn't work.
I guess not.
So where I'm going with this, and this is kind of my sharp contrast from the VA solution, is really, in my opinion, there is no need for federal anything in education, period. There's really even very little need for state anything in education. Where with the VA, obviously this is a federal thing. The military is a federal thing. You need to fix the VA because you cannot decentralize it. And like I said, in my opinion, that's a legitimate federal expense. Maybe we shouldn't be going to all these wars, but as far as veterans assistance, there's no real question on that. When it comes to education, though, and to go back to your question, to return to that about standardizing and being concerned about the quality, what we're concerned about is outcomes. And these outcomes are not having the kids taught what is standard and like objective reasoning is not the only factor. The factor is that versus how many of them succeed and how many of them get anywhere in life. And if you're so concerned with standardizing that you lose more kids than you win, then it's really just not worth it. It's simple cost-benefit analysis. So when you're talking
I'd be curious.
Right, but I'm not seeing any reason to believe that federal involvement is making things better. My personal opinion, and again, you got to let me get to the end of this, is that schools should be run by the communities they're in. When you have school boards,
You did just say should. I'm just saying.
I said my opinion. You said should. Yeah, shut up. No, that's great. But like, what I'm saying is, if you have schools run by not even by the cities, by their school boards, like like we think they are. That's why we elect school boards most of the time. That's who collects the funding. Now, a lot of times, school boards get their funding from the county or the city. So local fund the schools, and they decide what the curriculum is. They decide what to teach. Now, I understand your concern that, they're going to teach that, the Northern War of Aggression and all that. But my check on that, all you're citing there, in a sense, is a problem with free market self-interest. It's the same problem as with private enterprise. Well, what if they're so self-interested that they step on others? And the free market check on that is competition. If you have some little shit town in Alabama, and big city school boards in Alabama will not do this. They may be a little more conservative than New York or Boston. They're not going to teach kids that slavery was a good thing. They're not going to get very far doing that.
And maybe the answer to my question is, in this day and age, it'd be hard for them to do that in obscurity.
Right. So
they'd be publicly shamed to the point where they'd have to get with the
program. Get the fuck out. Right. They're going to get voted out of office because that's ridiculous, as they should be, because it's called accountability. Right now, no one even pays attention to school board elections. Because
it's funny, yeah, that's the one you just kind of check the box on. You don't even think about it, right? Yeah, I've been trying to research more.
But that body has so much more impact on your daily life if you have children.
Yes,
than the president or your senator or your governor. That's the one you should be paying attention to.
You don't even have a need for any of those people when you're most of your life. Yeah. Whereas if your kid goes to school every day you're affected by that.
And you got a bunch of fuck ups that are on the union payroll or some contractor payroll, like we do here where we are. Yep. That's running the schools. That becomes a very serious problem, and people are not paying attention. And this is as I'm saying, like, we don't pay attention to this stuff. And I feel like we would if they were more autonomous. I mean, there's other issues involved with that, but that's what it is now. Of course, one of the issues that comes up, and I'm shocked that you didn't bring it up, is the discrepancy in funding, or the stratification in funding. There's going to be schools that are, but between schools, like you have very rich schools. I'm not even talking about who's there in terms of like whether they're immigrants.
No, I said that. I was saying the property tax is standardized testing for non-standard schools. I was touching on it.
Okay, you were. So, of course, you're going to have schools that have more resources than other schools. Now, first of all, federal funding has not helped that worth crap. Let's face it, they try and they fail.
At the state level, it's still based on local property tax revenue. So,
right,
and on its face, you're going to have, and we went to an area of, a high school that was a very affluent area. So what we had is not what, in a high school in the middle of a really urban area would have.
And we still had, as you learned through a job you held afterwards where they were involved, a school board of corrupt ass hats.
Yes, that's true.
They were rich corrupt ass hats. The school had money. That didn't make them any better. What I find is that if you have more local control, and you're right here in the community, the other thing, the other reason school board elections matter, is that 100 or 200 votes make a difference. You piss off 100 people, you're getting voted off the school board.
That's
like
true.
That, because it's smaller. 100 people for the president is nothing. He pisses off more than that every time he speaks. But it's important if it's something that it's more accountability because fewer votes. Now, what I'm saying is, even if you have a school that doesn't have a lot of money, and I've seen this from personal experience from organizing around schools, having worked as an organizer in poorer communities, this is not something that anyone thinks is unimportant in the local community. Just like the VA, I want to meet the politician that says the VA is not important or veterans are not important. The same thing, no one in a local community says, fuck the schools. Let them go to shit. Let those kids, let those kids be hot because the AC is not working. Let them not learn. Even people who don't have kids in school, they don't tend to think that's not important.
Right.
So those communities actually, even though financially the schools suck and they don't have a lot of high-end equipment, they'll come out on the weekends and they'll pick up trash, and they have the kids' dads painting the schools, and people will donate stuff, and they organize around the schools, because for a lot of poorer communities, the schools are the hubs of social services. That's where their kids get free food, because they have reduced lunches or whatever.
Yep.
That's where their kids get medical care a lot of times, because now they're tied to a lot of the community clinics and they don't have health care otherwise. So that's something I feel like if you leave them alone, that's something the community will support and they'll find the money to support. You're actually getting in the way with all this standardization, because then they can't use the money they have and the resources they have. That includes not just money but people the way they want. They have to use it the way the federal government says, or they get nothing.
I guess my interest in attempting such a solution hinges on the fact that we've done it the other way so long and it clearly hasn't worked so far.
Yeah, and
I can't point it, like there's times where government maybe has succeeded. I can't point at this as being one of those times.
I'm sure it's out there somewhere.
Walking on the Moon, I think, is one, and I've talked about some of the others, but
show.
But my point is, it's if you're making a case for government getting things done, you don't in a good way, in an effective way. You don't point at federal school standards. You just don't. That's not up there on the list. Success story. No, it's not.
And here's the thing on that. Like, again, so to kind of finish my point about the check being competition, if you have some little shit town in Alabama that wants to teach kids KKK chants, they're not going to do that for very long, because what the fuck are those kids going to do for a job? Really?
If you walk into a building and the guy interviewing him is black, I ain't taking a job with no black guy. Yeah.
If the guy interviewing them is white and he starts doing the KKK chant, he is out of there so fast.
You don't have any black guys working here, do you? I can't work with any of those guys. I was told they were evil in school. Yeah.
Right, so it's such a stupid idea that, like, yeah, I'm sure there'll always be one town of idiots somewhere that decides that you can't help it.
Texas, I'm looking in your direction. Science and history.
Where was it? Kansas, the Westboro Baptist.
Or Kansas, that's a good one. Yeah.
There's always some little town of fucktards somewhere. Okay, when they have
states, these were the whole state. But anyway,
no, I'm not saying it. I don't think it's the whole state, by the way.
No, Kansas was the whole state. The State Board of Education wanted to change those standards for evolution. But this was the intelligent design debate. I do.
There's nothing intelligent about that. But anyway, yeah. You had the 8.9, like one of the biggest earthquakes in history, off the coast of Chile.
Yes.
And they had, like, they're evacuating people, and the only place that a lot of people died was this little, like, indigenous village that hung on a cliff, like a mile-high cliff over the ocean. Mm-hmm. And the federal government actually told them, hey, we need to evacuate your cliff. The structural integrity has been compromised. You're going to fall in the ocean. Uh-huh. And the guys told them, like, this is an actual story. Google it. I forget the name of the town. They said, no, the gods will protect us. We're not leaving our ancestral land. And the bureaucrats, this is Chile, not the U.S., says, like, okay, well, give the gods our regards. You're going to be meeting them in about an hour. That's it. And they died. And it's sad because all their little kids that they refused to evacuate. And they offered to send them trucks and helicopters to evacuate them and get them out of there. And out. So there's always some little shit town somewhere of people that are stuck about 200-300 years back. And I personally don't like the idea of holding back the entire country's education because of what those idiots are going to do if you give them the freedom to do it. You kind of have to let them destroy themselves.
Well, and I like I said out the outset, it's a concern, is all.
Concern. And if you have,
it would affect my policy, but I'll ask the question.
Let's say you have a town somewhere in rural Alabama, or Kansas, or even Texas, and you have a school board in this town that's made up of 5 old rich white guys, because we don't allow women to serve in our decision-making positions, because women should be staying home and cooking dinner and raising children. Okay, you have that town in mind, and we still have those towns in this.
Oh country. Yeah, throw a dart at Texas. I don't
know if throw a dart, but those towns, there's fewer of them, and they're not as bad as they were 50 years ago. There's no lynchings going on, but they're there. And we have to deal with that as part of our culture. You really think federal standards of education are going to do anything for that town? You think those kids aren't fucked anyway?
Well, I guess.
Why should we punish millions of children in places that are more progressive than that are not remotely that retarded, with shitty education standards that could make it otherwise, because we want to shove something down the throat of that little town. We're not helping them. It's just kind of putting a check on our liberal guilt. Oh, we tried to help everybody. Well, you failed.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask the question. I had a feeling this would be the answer, and I'm glad I was right. Um,
You know,
yeah,
this,
I see your point.
I agree that as a general rule, and if people want to do this, actually one more thing I want to address. If the people want to do this, I respect their decisions. I agree that as a general rule, people should not be limiting their children's education to the dinner table. It's very important to impart values on them and to parent your children, but I think that we've reached an age, probably for the last 200 years or so, where that's not going to be sufficient just education-wise. Your kids need more of an education than just what you know.
And not in light of I come at it like I was saying as a thing of as citizens of the world now that and a lot of really psycho pro-American people are like, oh, it's just the country that matters. No, man, we're way more connected now with others across the globe. So
that's a whole different type of stupid.
Keeping up our end and being intelligent on the world stage is important too. Otherwise, you get George W. Bush. Anyway.
I hear you, and I would say, you'd be surprised at actually, I think, how well we measure up against a lot of other countries in that matter. We're always compare ourselves to places like in Western Europe, which are very, very integrated.
Or Japan, Asia, yeah.
Well, I don't think Japan is very big on being citizens of the world. I've been to Japan, and I know...
Well, they're not in that sense, but I'm saying they always get math and science. So.
Math and science, but not social science, and that's a big problem. In any case, going back to our discussion, so I do feel that these should be community solutions and not necessarily just individuals, but small scale, town by town, board by board. However, where I do disagree with one of your kind of projections here is that you're going to have people opting out that want to teach their children KKK chants or crazy, backwards religion stuff and not teach them critical thinking. I feel that people that are that far gone, they're doing that already. Because they're doing it out of ideology. They're pulling their kids out of school, not because they think the schools suck, but because they don't want their children learning that it's okay for a white man to marry a black woman, and that it's okay to not accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Like, people that are that far gone and they care that much, again, quantitatively, I'd say for the most part, they've already pulled their kids out of public schools. Who I think is opting out now, as we're really more seeing the famine-driven rebellion, is people that are just concerned about the education level and the education standards and just how shitty the schools are. And a lot of times, safety is a big one. The schools are just not safe because they have no resources to keep the kids safe and provide a safe learning environment.
Yeah, Sandy Hook, I'm looking in your direction.
See, Sandy Hook, to me, that is more of an exception. That's why it's shocking. You notice these shootings are always in suburban, rich schools.
True, yeah.
Okay? Because when shootings happen, like not mass shootings, but a gang shooting in like an inner city school somewhere where most of them are minorities, you don't even see that on the news. That's just normal. But there's kids in those schools that are not involved in gangs. In fact, most of them aren't. And there's kids that want to do very well, and their parents are very concerned with their education, and you can see why they don't want to put them in those schools, because it's not safe to the point where it's a detriment to their educational experience. So I can see where people opting out en masse over the quality of education versus over ideology is actually a good thing, because again, it's a competitive check, just like people opting out of the VA. Destroys faith in the VA and basically faith in the politics of war, and we have to rethink it before we can ever go to war again. And that's a good thing, because we go there at the drop of a dime. Same thing here. This starts happening, and you will have enough pushback, not just from people, but from local authorities, from the states, just basically for the federal government to butt out of education. I think that's where this is going, and I think that's a good thing.
I love how the neocon solution to this, by the way, is for-profit charter schools that follow the same standards.
That's working so well in the prison system. Let's
just have entrenched business interests take it over. Sure, yes.
Fascism is not the safe alternative to socialism. I don't know why anyone gets that. They're really not that different. It's weird to me because 100 years ago everyone realized they were the same thing.
Right. And as we know, the private prison system has resulted in way less prison expense and less
Way less recidivism. Yeah.
incarceration and less recidivism. Yes, and hasn't in any way created a kind of a prison cycle where people are just constantly in and out of the system.
Oh, so wait, these charter schools,
Right.
there's going to be charter prisons, right? The school to prison pipeline. We're just going to have are the same corporations going to run the schools? They're just preparing the kids to, to
Which actually,
graduate into the penitentiary.
that's happened in public school districts. Actually, oddly enough, there was some in Mississippi.
No, there's nothing odd about it. I'm just saying, if that's the success, those are the success stories we have. If those are the kind of things that happen, isn't that what we should expect when we put private corporations in charge of it that are that are funded by the government? Because the only thing more corrupt than a bureaucrat is a private partner of a bureaucrat. They're just one more step removed from accountability. It's not
Burton,
because
I'm looking in your direction.
don't
Yeah.
get me started on them, please.
Anyway.
So, I think we've more or less covered the theme of this show, which is opting out. But
Opting out.
there's kind of one more thing I want to talk about opting out, and I don't really know how to feel about this yet, but I like to be somewhat positive and somewhat optimistic. What I'm seeing, interestingly, in this kind of we're in the middle of the primary season here, and we haven't even really mentioned it yet on this show, because it's turning into one of the most boring election seasons of all time that I've been paying attention for about 15, 16 years now.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell won.
Okay, and again, that's a whole different story. Mitch McConnell won
in America, we protect the rights of our citizens, and we support the right to bear arms. And
he's such a joke. Like, I don't understand how anyone can take that guy seriously.
yeah, I don't get it.
The funny thing is, the guy running against him called himself Tea Party. He wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
He was just someone like you always talk about Tea Party being astroturfed and whatnot. This was a perfect example of just a bunch of organizations and a bunch of rich donors picking a guy and saying, okay, this is the Tea Party guy that's going to run.
He was the Koch brother Tea Party guy.
Right, and a lot of libertarian interests, the same guys that supported Rand Paul and, supported, who's the guy, is it Heelskamp? No, Massey, who was Rand Paul's guy in the last, one of the House seats in Kentucky. They looked at this guy and said, the problem with libertarians is we actually do our own research. Just because the Koch brothers fund somebody, if they fund a libertarian, we'll vote for him. If they fund some asshole that's not a libertarian and tell us to vote, yeah, fuck you.
Yeah.
You're very difficult to control. So they looked at this guy and they published, look, this guy's voting record is worse. Well, not voting record, but his policy record is worse than McConnell's. He's the same guy. He's claiming to be all Mr. Outsider, Mr. Tea Party, or he's not. So fuck him. And if you don't have those people turned out, the incumbent's going to win by a landslide. But what I'm seeing happen is just people opting out of another thing, and that's voting. I mean, the turnouts are just abysmal. If you look at, was it North Carolina, right, the primary?
Yes.
They had a 16% turnout. Now,
is that where Clay Aiken won? Is that one? Is that the one where Clay Aiken won the primary? Against the guy who just died or something like that?
No. That's a different place. I forget where that is, but it's not there. This is Thom Tillis was the guy's name, and Rand supported the other guy.
Well, I'm talking about on the Democratic side, I think. But anyway,
I don't know which state that was. Maybe. No, I don't think that was. No, that was not North Carolina. That was later. I am getting kind of sick. Even I'm not as paying attention to these as much as I normally do.
Yeah,
and that's saying a lot. So 16% turnout for a Republican primary. That's embarrassing even for the United States. I mean, We're known for not voting and not paying attention, but 16%. That's crap.
It's easier to say, well, who did go than who didn't go.
Really? And going even, and this is just people that are registered to vote, or eligible to vote, I'm sorry. Eligible to vote. Now, if you go further than that, okay, and I'm seeing a lot of media, left, right, whatever, spin this as, the establishment's coming back and they're crushing the Tea Party. The headlines with McConnell. McConnell crushes the Tea Party. No, he won his primary against a guy that wasn't even Tea Party, but we won't go there. What's really happening, if you look at it objectively, is incumbents are winning. Like if you look at Justin Amash, who hasn't had his primary yet, but statistically in the polls, he's crushing the dumbass that the neocons are trying to run against him, that Karl Rove is behind. Mm-hmm. And if you look at Mike Onzi, what's her name? Cheney's daughter actually dropped her candidacy because that was just going to be way too embarrassing. And I forget which state that's in. But
Wyoming, yeah.
Wyoming, yeah. So it's really whoever's already there is staying there. There's very little of this successful primary challenges. There's some, but there's not very many. Now, primary challenges are a difficult thing to do. You have to have a lot of grassroots support. People have to be excited. And in this case, in this environment, where you have, this libertarian liberty contingent that's very good at doing its own research, the candidates have to be legit. They have to have a history of actually doing what they say they're going to do and not just being Matt Devin. So without those factors, and you don't have them, you're just going to have the incumbents win. That's just what happens. And if you look at projections, now it's kind of early to tell, but if you look at some of the projections coming out for the general elections, it's really kind of looking the same way. It's a little bit of, a little bit of backlash to Obamacare.
Yeah.
Maybe Republicans picking up a few seats in Senate, maybe taking control of it, maybe not, but coming close. Everything else is really just kind of staying the same.
I do question how much that's even a factor, actually, but
I can see it being a little bit. But again, if you have, Republicans in the House, not in the Senate, they control enough seats. There's a limited amount of actual contested seats. Most of this country is gerrymandered to hell.
Yes, sir.
And it's safe for one party. So Republicans already at this point control most of the contested seats. So if nothing's changing, if nothing's moving, that's Republicans winning. Now that's them staying in power as incumbent. That's not the same as them taking over.
Right.
But that's still them winning. So what I'm seeing, really, and I'm seeing it's so pathetic, but it warms my heart, is I'm seeing Democrats and Republicans try to spin this deathly disinterest in politics in their favor. But if you look at the polls, if you listen to what's happening, no, you have no mandate because no one's voting. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Everything's staying as it is because nobody cares. You're all idiots. We don't want to vote for you. Fuck off.
This is like the George Carlin approach. Hey, I'll be home after I'm done with election day. I'll have something to show for it, at least. Yeah.
Right.
I'll be jacking off. You'll be doing the same thing. Only I'll have something to show for it. That's what he's. Yeah.
It's true. But here's the thing. Here's my concern about this. This is a good place to close out. It's going to be very radical and very questionable. I don't necessarily know if I'm right, 100% right, but this is kind of where I'm seeing this going. What I'm seeing, and this goes right back to the VA and the change in war politics and the education system and a number of other things, the Bundy standoff, which we talked about last time. We're just witnessing the death of federalism. This is how it happens. If we're to the point where people are so jaded they just will not vote for federal politicians, and please don't tell me people are disinterested and they're not pissed off, because they are. This economic situation sucks donkey dick. We have all these problems, and yet no one's voting because people have no faith in government changing anything and fixing anything. Plus, we have one of the most deadlocked political situations of our history. We have the Tea Party, which is there. It's not a majority, but it's there. And it's so intransigent, and it won't move on anything, and it keeps blocking the Republican Party from doing anything, and the Republican Party controls the House. That's highly unlikely to change. You have a president that won't budge on anything in the other direction, and you have the Senate that's also falling apart. So you see how, as long as this deadlock remains and anger doesn't put one party in control, one or the other, nothing's going to change. And all they can do is blame each other. They constantly point fingers at each other. Oh, it's the other party's fault. And then they're surprised no one wants to vote for either of them.
Yeah, I guess it should be a mystery, huh?
I wonder why.
Gee, yeah. Like we said before, it's going to be interesting. It will be interesting.
But what that goes back to, and again, this is, like I said, this is radical and it's a little strange, but think about it. It's counterintuitive. As long as this situation persists, guys like me win. Radical, anti-federalist libertarians. This is our victory. Because neither side can take control of the government and do anything. And the government is in such bad shape in every sense. They're teetering on bankruptcy. They have no buy-in, no legitimacy, no one believes in them. Government services suck ass. We're behind on every bureaucracy to the point where people are opting out of government services that they're entitled to because they're so shitty and finding alternative means. And you're so deadlocked that you can't do anything about this. This keeps up for another 2-3 cycles. Federal government's going to be a nominal thing. It's going to be like the Vatican.
I guess it's possible, yeah.
I'm not saying we're going to get there necessarily, but that's kind of the path we're on. And when you look at incidents like the Bundy standoff, you can kind of see where the federal government just doesn't have the power and the authority that it used to have. And it has to do with buy-in. People have to comply, and they have to be behind the government, or at least not be pissed off enough to stand up against it by force, because every time enough people do that, government fails. And the Bundy standoff was perhaps the first of many in this cycle, instances where, oh shit, the government didn't have the force authority to overwhelm those non-complying with it, so they chose to back off, and I applaud them for it. But there's going to be more of that. Nullification is rearing its ugly head, and I've been talking about it for 3 or 4 years now, and it's finally starting to materialize, and we're going to see more of it. Nullification is not a violent thing. It's just people refusing to do what the federal government wants them to do, and the federal government having neither the capacity nor the desire to do anything about it. If that's where we are, why would anyone even bother to vote in federal elections? They don't do anything. They're useless.
I guess another example of such a thing would be when the full body scanners came out and the mandatory pat downs happened for Thanksgiving season. Remember, they were going to have a mass movement for people to opt out of the scans to get patted down, knowing that it would snarl traffic across the whole country. And what did they do? They just let people through the lines without a pat down.
Exactly.
There's no way in hell they could keep up with it.
Right.
And it just paralyzed the system otherwise, yeah.
Non-compliance
That's non-compliance.
Works. Yeah. But it works.
And it didn't even have to come to that, could they just ahead of time shut it down? They knew it wouldn't work. So the government did it for us. They just went, okay, we just can't now, because they're going to just fuck with us, and we have not the capacity to handle it, and yeah, so...
Yep. And I feel like we're moving in that direction, and what makes me happy is that for the most part, it's looking non-violent. Change is something that's going to happen regardless, but when you can accomplish it with minimal violence, I think that's a huge win for humanity.
Yeah,
and Syria.
Or Egypt.
Right, and it looks to me like we're accomplishing this relatively peaceful. There's flare-ups here and there, but there's not full-scale war. There's not massive bloodshed, and I find that to be a very positive thing. So that's really all I had on my conclusion. Got a little long there, but
I'll just say me too, I guess, on that one. But I do want to, like I said, thanks for all listening. I know we were gone a while. I do want to throw out, and I never do this, I want to throw out a gauntlet for our next topic on the next show. Assuming we don't already have one, maybe not the next show, but it could be the one afterward. I want to discuss climate change. Now, that we can wait on, simmer on that. Obviously, there's a lot of ins and outs. Honestly, I want to get my research together for this before I do it, because I want to. It's become a story, and it's become very much part of the culture. But where we go, and I don't even mean as a state, even a country, but as humans. Planet Earth. That's what I want to kind of get into.
That really...
It's a clusterfuck.
A can of worms you want to open, Joe.
Yes, it is.
Okay, all right.
So and why I'd say it might not be the next episode is we may have a guest for a next episode. We're not sure yet. I don't want to give more details yet because it's still in the very early stages, but...
A very special guest, not a friend of ours, but someone that you may have actually heard of.
Yes. And we would be very grateful if they on the show. I don't want to put out anything yet before we know anything for sure, but it's being discussed, and we'll, release all that as we get more information, obviously. But I guess what I'm saying is stay tuned, because there's going to be some things happening that'll be very interesting. And for any new fans and listeners, welcome. If you may have caught up with us at some of the events in LA in the last few weeks, Liberty on the Rocks among them, and the Free and Equal Festival at the Velasco Theater. Met a lot of good people out there, so if you're listening, welcome. So, thank you for joining us. I am Joe Ryan.
And I'm Neurotoxin.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to The Edge of Chaos. We can be found on the internet at edgeofchaospodcast.com. That's edgeofchaospodcast.com. Contact the show at edgeofchaospodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at edgeofchaosshow. We can be found on Facebook at facebook.com/theedgeofchaos. Neurotoxins blog can be found at neurotoxins with an S, fyg.blogspot.com. My blog can be found at joeryansworld.blogspot.com. For Neurotoxin, this is Joe Ryan. Thank you for listening to The Edge of Chaos.
But Say what you want about America, land of the free, home of the brave. We got some dumbass motherfuckers floating around this country. Dumbass motherfuckers, you know? Yeah. Now, obviously, that doesn't include this audience. I understand that. You seem intelligent and perceptive, but the rest of them, holy jumping fucking shitballs. Dumber than a second coat of paint. But if you talk to one of them about this, if you isolate one of them, you sit them down rationally, and you talk to them about the low IQs and the dumb behavior and the bad decisions, right away they start talking about education. That's the big answer to everything. Education. They say we need more money for education. We need more books, more teachers, more classrooms, more schools. We need more testing for the kids. And you say to them, well, you know, we've tried all of that, and the kids still can't pass the test. They say, don't you worry about that. We're going to lower the passing grades. And that's what they do in a lot of these schools now. They lower the passing grades so more kids can pass. More kids pass, the school looks good, everybody's happy, the IQ of the country slips another 2 or 3 points, and pretty soon all you'll need to get into college is a fucking pencil. Got a pencil? Get the fuck in there, it's physics. Then everyone wonders why 17 other countries graduate more scientists than we do. Education. Politicians know that word. They use it on you. Politicians have traditionally hidden behind 3 things: the flag, the Bible, and children. No child left behind. No child left behind. Oh, really? Well, it wasn't long ago you were talking about giving kids a head start. Head start, left behind. Someone's losing fucking ground here. But there's a reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The big, wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. Politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. You know something? They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back, so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later, because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they use to beat you over the head with all day long, when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged. And nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all. Yeah. You know? And nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, and blue dick that's being jammed up their assholes every day. Because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.